I'm Oliver, 27 years old, and I guess you could say my family's favorite pastime is pretending everything's fine while quietly resenting each other. Growing up, my dad ran a mid-sized construction supply company that had been in the family for 3 generations. My mom played the part of the perfect supportive wife, though most of her support went to my older brother, Nathan. He was the golden prospect, ambitious, charming, and loud about it. I was quieter, more reserved, and preferred staying behind the scenes, working things out logically instead of dramatically. My parents didn't really know what to do with that. Nathan could say the same idea I had, word for word, and they'd call it genius. If I said it, they'd nod politely and move on to whatever Nathan wanted to talk about. Still, I didn't hate them. I just learned to keep my head down. After college, I went my own way. I studied business management, but decided I didn't want to work under my dad's thumb, so I started my own small consulting company. Nothing big, just me and a couple of freelance accountants helping struggling small businesses figure out their finances. It was quiet work, but it paid well enough. I liked the independence, and I liked that nobody could dismiss my ideas simply because they came from me. Meanwhile, Nathan joined Dad's company right after college and was practically treated like a prodigy. He's got vision, Dad would say. He'll take the company to the next level. The next level, as it turned out, was a series of overly ambitious expansions, expensive new contracts with unreliable partners, and a warehouse full of overpriced inventory that no one needed. By the time I turned 27, the business was hanging by a thread. I didn't know how bad things had gotten until Mom called me one night in that dramatic, hushed tone she used when she wanted to sound concerned but not guilty. "Oliver," she started, "your father's been under a lot of pressure. The company, well, Nathan's had some setbacks. Maybe you could stop by this weekend? He could use your input." My input. That was funny, considering the last time I offered an opinion at a family dinner, Nathan rolled his eyes so hard I thought he'd sprained something. Still, part of me felt a flicker of curiosity. I hadn't set foot in the company offices in over 5 years. The idea of walking in there now, with everything falling apart, was almost poetic. So I agreed. I drove down that Saturday morning to the office, which used to feel impressive. Big glass windows, Dad's name on the front, the kind of building that made you think success was built into its walls. Now it looked tired. The paint was dull, the parking lot nearly empty, and even the logo on the front sign had faded. When I walked inside, the receptionist looked surprised to see me. "Mr. Oliver." "Wow, it's been a while," she said, half whispering. I noticed the hesitation in her voice. The air in that place felt heavy, like everyone was trying to keep a secret. Dad was in his office with Nathan when I knocked. The tension between them was thick enough to feel through the glass door. When Dad saw me, he stood up with this forced smile. "Oliver, good to see you, son," he said, the word son landing a bit awkwardly, like he hadn't used it in years. Nathan didn't even bother standing. He just glanced at me with that half-smirk he'd perfected as a kid, the one that said, "You shouldn't even be here." "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you heard about the situation?" "Only vaguely," I replied. "Mom said the company's having some trouble." Dad sighed and gestured for me to sit. His voice carried that stern calmness he used whenever he was about to tell someone they'd disappointed him. "The truth is, we've hit a rough patch. Supply costs have gone up, 2 of our biggest clients backed out, and we've had some logistical mismanagement." "Mismanagement?" Nathan echoed defensively. "You mean unexpected setbacks? The market's unpredictable." Dad gave him a look. "Whatever you want to call it, it's not good. And the banks are starting to lose patience." I sat quietly for a moment, processing what I was hearing. Then I asked the question that immediately made Nathan tense. "How bad is it?" Dad exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temples. "We're operating at a loss. And unless something changes soon, we'll have to sell part of the business." I raised an eyebrow. "Part of it? Or all of it?" Nathan scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. It's temporary." Dad didn't correct him, which told me everything I needed to know. Then Dad looked at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. A careful, deliberate look, the kind people use when they're about to say something you won't like. "Oliver," he said slowly, "I've been thinking. You've got a good head for this kind of thing. Maybe it's time you stepped in and helped your brother turn things around." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "You want me to fix the company?" "Help fix it," Nathan interjected sharply. "Don't overstate it." Dad held up a hand. "Oliver's got experience. He's been working with small businesses, hasn't he? Maybe he can help us restructure, find where we're bleeding money. I looked between them, my mind flicking back to all those years I was ignored, belittled, and brushed aside whenever I dared to offer advice. The same people who told me I wasn't business-minded enough now wanted my help. I don't mind helping, I said carefully, but I need full access to the financials. No half-truths. Nathan crossed his arms, already bristling. So you think you're just going to waltz in and tell us how to run the company Dad built? No, I said evenly. I think I'm going to look at the numbers and see what's actually happening. Dad sighed, clearly exhausted by the tension. Enough. We'll discuss details later. For now, just take a look and tell us what you think. So I did. I spent the rest of that day combing through records, accounting files, invoices, payment schedules. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just bad luck or market shifts. It was carelessness. Overlapping contracts, personal expenses disguised as business costs, suppliers overpaid by thousands. And Nathan's name appeared on almost every questionable transaction. That night, I sat in my old bedroom, staring at the spreadsheets on my laptop. My chest felt tight, not just from frustration, but from a sense of betrayal that had been quietly building for years. Nathan hadn't just made mistakes. He'd been reckless, and Dad had looked the other way. And now they wanted me to fix it? The next morning, over breakfast, Dad asked, "So, what do you think?" Before I could answer, Nathan spoke up. "He's going to say we need to cut staff." That's what consultants always say. I set my coffee down and looked directly at Dad. "No, I think you need to cut spending. Specifically, stop funneling company money into Nathan's personal projects." The table went silent. Mom froze mid-bite, her fork clinking softly against her plate. Nathan's jaw tightened. Dad's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying," I said calmly. "I'm showing you what's already there. Your son's been using company funds for things that don't even relate to the business. Trips, dinners, client meetings that don't exist. It's all here." Nathan slammed his hand on the table. "That's a lie." Mom flinched, and Dad's face darkened. "Enough," he barked. Then, more quietly, "Oliver, that's a serious accusation." "I know it is," I said, "but the numbers don't lie." That's when Nathan leaned forward, eyes burning with resentment. "You think you're smarter than me, huh? You think because you read a few spreadsheets you understand how things work? You've never carried the weight of this business like I have." I could feel my pulse quicken. The years of quiet insults, the dismissals, the patronizing tone, it all bubbled up. "Maybe that's the problem," I said. "You've been carrying it instead of managing it. And now it's collapsing." Dad stood abruptly, his expression unreadable. "That's enough for today," he said. "We'll revisit this conversation tomorrow." I left soon after, driving back home with my thoughts spinning. The entire drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger, that they weren't going to take my warning seriously. I didn't know it yet, but that conversation would set off a chain of events that would change everything. The next time I sat across from my family in that office, things wouldn't just be tense. They'd be explosive. And it all started with that one line I never forgot. Dad's voice calm, cold, and certain. "You'll handle this one, Oliver. It's your turn to fix the business." I didn't sleep much after that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on Nathan's face, that arrogant disbelief, as if I'd just insulted his entire existence by suggesting he was wrong. And Dad's reaction had been worse. He hadn't defended me, hadn't asked for proof, hadn't even looked at the numbers himself. He just shut down the conversation like he always did when things got uncomfortable. That was his pattern. When Nathan messed up, Dad called it a learning experience. When I messed up, it was a disappointment. Still, I went back the following week because part of me, the foolish, loyal part, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could still be salvaged. Maybe if I worked hard enough, they'd finally see that I wasn't the failure they always assumed I'd be. When I arrived Monday morning, the office was buzzing with quiet tension. I could feel eyes on me as I walked in. The receptionist avoided my gaze, which was unusual. She'd always been kind to me. I reached Dad's office, but before I could knock, I heard raised voices inside. Nathan's voice, sharp and defensive. "I'm telling you, he's exaggerating. You think I'd risk the company over a few business dinners?" Dad's voice came next, lower but stern. "He had receipts, Nathan. Real numbers. You can't just ignore that." I waited for a moment, debating whether to walk away or go in, but before I could decide, the door swung open. Nathan nearly bumped into me, his expression sour. "You just love playing the hero, don't you?" he hissed under his breath. "Come to save the family from the big bad brother?" I didn't respond. He brushed past me, shoulders stiff, and stormed down the hall. Dad looked up from his desk. He seemed older that day, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. "Oliver," he said, motioning for me to sit. "We need to talk." I sat across from him, waiting. "I went through the accounts," he said after a long pause. "You were right. There are inconsistencies. But Nathan insists some of those expenses were legitimate. He claims he was entertaining potential investors." "Then where are the contracts?" I asked. Dad frowned. "That's what I asked him." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "He couldn't provide any. Said they fell through." I bit the inside of my cheek, trying to stay calm. "Dad, he's been misusing company funds. You can't just brush this off again." "I'm not brushing it off," he said sharply. "But he's my son, your brother." That hit a nerve. "I'm your son too," I said quietly. He looked away. "You always take things personally, Oliver." I wanted to laugh at that. Personally, my father had just told me that the same man who'd nearly tanked his company still deserved endless understanding because he happened to be the older son, the leader, the future. That conversation ended the same way it always did, with me leaving his office feeling like the ground beneath me was crumbling. Over the next few weeks, I kept coming back. I worked late nights, poring over reports, cutting unnecessary expenses, calling suppliers to renegotiate contracts. Slowly, the numbers started improving. For the first time in months, the company wasn't bleeding money. You'd think that would have earned me some appreciation. But instead, Nathan grew more hostile. He'd make snide comments in front of the staff, little digs meant to humiliate me. "Don't mind my brother," he'd say to one of the employees. "He's the spreadsheet guy, doesn't really understand how real business works." Or he'd roll his eyes whenever I made a suggestion. "Here we go again. Mr. Numbers thinks he's in charge." The worst part was watching everyone pretend not to notice. My parents, the employees, even the managers I helped save from layoffs, all just smiled tightly and looked away. No one wanted to get in the middle of it. Then one Friday evening, I stayed late to finish a report when I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Nathan was in the conference room with one of Dad's oldest clients, Mr. Lawson, a man whose business accounted for nearly 30% of our revenue. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the half-open door. "I can assure you, Mr. Lawson," Nathan said smoothly, "the restructuring plan is all under control. We're securing new funding from an investor next week. My brother's handling the paperwork, but I'm overseeing everything personally." My stomach dropped. "What funding? What investor?" Lawson's voice was cautious. "You mean Oliver? He's been handling my account." "Yes, but you know how he is," Nathan said with a laugh. "Good with details, not so great with vision. I'm making sure things move in the right direction." I clenched my jaw, quietly stepping back before they saw me. If I confronted him there, in front of a client, it would only make things worse. But I knew right then that Nathan wasn't just trying to discredit me. He was using my work to make himself look competent again. That night, I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I'd been patient. I'd bitten my tongue for years. But I could feel something shifting inside me, a quiet anger, steady and deliberate. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I went through every contract, every communication I'd sent, every update Nathan had signed off on. And then I found it, a new proposal submitted under his name, but written entirely in my words. He'd literally copied my report, changed the author line, and sent it to a potential investor as his own. It was dated 2 days ago. That was the breaking point. I printed both versions, mine and his, and marched straight into Dad's office. He looked surprised to see me so early. "Oliver, what's going on?" I dropped the papers on his desk. This is what's going on." He picked them up, frowning, flipping through the pages. "I don't understand. Look at the timestamps. Look at the file names. He stole my work, changed the name, and sent it to an investor as his own. That's fraud, Dad. You can't just ignore this." Before he could respond, the office door opened. Nathan walked in, looking perfectly calm. I was hoping we'd all be here," he said with that insufferable smirk. "I was just about to tell you about the proposal." Dad turned to him. "Oliver says you copied his work." Nathan didn't even flinch. Copied? No. I used it. There's a difference. We're family. We share ideas. It's not like he owns the concept of restructuring. My voice trembled slightly, but I held my ground. It wasn't a shared idea. It was my entire proposal, word for word. Nathan shrugged. And it's a good proposal. You should be flattered. That did it. Flattered, I said, my voice rising despite myself. You've spent years treating me like I'm beneath you, and now you're stealing my work and calling it collaboration? I'm the reason this company hasn't completely imploded, Nathan. You're the reason it almost did. Dad stood, his face turning red. Enough. Both of you. Nathan turned on me with that condescending tone he'd perfected over the years. You think Dad's going to take your side? Please. You've always been the backup plan, Oliver. The spare. I felt something in me snap. Not loudly, not violently, but quietly, like a thin rope finally giving way under too much strain. Dad looked between us, clearly torn. Nathan, if what Oliver's saying is true, this isn't acceptable. Nathan scoffed. Oh, come on. You really think he didn't plan this? He's jealous, Dad. He's been waiting for a chance to make me look bad. I looked straight at my father. You can check the metadata yourself. The files don't lie. But instead of doing that, he just sighed heavily and rubbed his temples. I can't deal with this right now. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. That was it. That was all he said. No decision, no accountability, just avoidance. Nathan smirked, brushing past me as if I were invisible. Told you, he muttered under his breath. I stood there stunned. After everything, all the work I'd done, all the hours I'd spent trying to save the company they'd built, my own father still couldn't stand up for me. I left that office without saying another word. Drove home, sat in my car for nearly an hour, just staring at the dashboard while everything settled in. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about years of being dismissed, underestimated, and replaced in my own family story. And as much as it hurt, that was the moment something inside me hardened. I realized I wasn't going to keep trying to fix their mistakes, not without consequences. Because if they wanted me to handle things, I would. After that day, I didn't step foot in my father's office for a long while. I'd love to say I left with my head high and some grand plan for payback, but the truth was messier than that. I was furious, yes, but underneath that anger was something heavier, disappointment. Not just in my family, but in myself for ever believing I could fix them. For thinking if I just worked harder, if I just proved myself enough, they'd finally see me. The following week, I got an email from my mother, short, polite, and painfully cold. Your father thinks it's best if you take some time away from the company while things settle. Nathan needs space to manage. No, thank you. No, we appreciate what you did. Just dismissal dressed in diplomacy. I stared at that email for a long time, rereading the words until they blurred. They'd chosen him. Again, even after I'd done everything right. I'd saved their business from collapsing, and they rewarded me by pushing me aside like an inconvenience. I didn't reply. For the first time in years, I felt completely empty. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. My small apartment felt like a stranger's home. Cold coffee cups stacking up, unopened mail piling near the door, my laptop sitting untouched on the desk. I'd built my life around being useful, around solving problems, and now I didn't even know who I was without that. It wasn't until a week later that I got a call from one of the suppliers I'd helped during the restructuring. Her name was Maria, and she owned a mid-sized lumber business that had nearly gone under before I renegotiated her contract. Oliver, she said, her voice soft but firm. I heard what happened. Word gets around in this industry. I groaned, rubbing my forehead. Let me guess, Nathan's spinning his version already? She laughed lightly. Of course. He's telling everyone the company's thriving thanks to his strategy. Figures, I muttered. There was a pause on the line. Listen, I know you're probably not interested in more business right now, but I could really use your help. My cousin's construction startup is bleeding money. He needs someone to look at the numbers. I told him about you. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to get dragged back into another mess. But I needed something, anything, to keep from drowning in my own thoughts. Sure, I said finally. Send me the details. That job became the first domino. The cousin's startup wasn't just struggling, it was chaos. Poor accounting, scattered contracts, disorganized suppliers. But within a month, I'd stabilized things. Within 3, they were turning a profit. The word spread faster than I expected. Other small companies started reaching out, family-run businesses, local suppliers, contractors on the verge of collapse. It was exhausting but oddly therapeutic. Each problem I solved felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. These people didn't care about my last name or my family's legacy. They cared that I showed up, listened, and fixed what others couldn't. I began formalizing it into a business model. I registered my consulting firm under a new name, Northway Solutions. Simple, clean, professional. I started hiring a few freelancers I'd met during previous projects, accountants, marketers, logistics experts. Before I knew it, we were managing over a dozen clients. For the first time in years, I was building something that was mine. But that didn't mean my family was gone from my mind. Every success came with a whisper of bitterness. They could have been proud of me for this. Instead, I imagined them sitting in their office, pretending I didn't exist, still under Nathan's direction. And as it turned out, Nathan was driving things into the ground even faster than before. One afternoon, about 6 months later, I ran into one of Dad's former employees, a guy named Chris, at a networking event. He looked surprised to see me. "Oliver, man, you're hard to find these days. Heard you're doing great." I smiled awkwardly. "Trying to. How's the company?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Honestly, it's a mess. Nathan's been making wild promises to investors. We're short on cash flow, half the staff left, and your dad's, well, he's not looking good." A part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was quickly drowned by something else, sadness, maybe. Despite everything, that business had been my childhood. I'd spent summers running around the warehouse, learning how things worked. Hearing it was collapsing felt like watching an old house crumble. "Does my dad know how bad it is?" I asked. Chris shrugged. "He knows, but he's in denial. Thinks Nathan will turn it around." That line made me laugh quietly. It was like a curse. No matter how much evidence stacked against him, Nathan could do no wrong in their eyes. After that conversation, I didn't go looking for updates, but they found me anyway. Clients, suppliers, even competitors started mentioning it. Rumors spread that the company was missing payments, that a major contract had fallen through, that banks were backing out of financing. I didn't take any pleasure in their downfall, not yet. But I did feel a strange sense of inevitability. They'd sown this themselves. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a rainy Thursday evening when my mother called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Oliver," she said, her tone clipped and formal. "Your father needs to see you. It's urgent." I leaned back in my chair. "Why?" "Last time I checked, he didn't want me involved." "Please," she said, and for the first time, her voice cracked. He's not well, and things at the company are getting worse." I could have said no. I should have said no. But the old part of me, the one that still craved some kind of closure, couldn't resist. I drove over the next morning. The office looked worse than ever. The lights in the lobby flickered, the air smelled faintly of dust and old coffee, and the once busy phones were silent. Dad was in his office, sitting at his desk with his hands clasped tightly together. He looked thinner, older, like the years had finally caught up to him all at once. Nathan stood by the window, scrolling on his phone, pretending everything was fine. "Oliver," Dad said quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd see." "I wasn't planning to," I said honestly. "But Mom said it was urgent." He nodded slowly. "It is." He hesitated, glancing at Nathan before continuing. "The truth is, we're out of options. The bank's cutting us off. We've lost 2 major contracts. The accountant says we've got maybe 2 months before we're insolvent." Nathan rolled his eyes. "It's not that bad." Dad slammed his palm on the desk, startling us both. "It is that bad. You've been lying to me for months, Nathan. Promising investors, taking advances, hiding losses." Nathan turned pale. "Who told you that?" "I went through the accounts myself," Dad said bitterly. "It's all there." The room went dead silent. For a long moment, I just watched the two of them. My brother, the self-proclaimed genius, finally cornered by his own arrogance. My father, the man who defended him at every turn, finally seeing the truth. And then, as if fate couldn't resist irony, Dad turned to me. "Oliver," he said, his voice low but steady, "you'll handle this one." He paused, the words deliberate. "It's your turn to fix the business." I laughed, not loudly, but quietly, the kind of laugh that escapes when disbelief collides with exhaustion. "You're serious?" He nodded. You're the only one who can. Nathan snapped, his composure breaking. You can't just hand it to him. He's been waiting for this, Dad. He's been hoping I'd fail. I looked at him, meeting his glare. No, Nathan. I was hoping you'd finally learn. But I didn't say yes, not yet. Because something in me had changed. I wasn't the desperate son begging for approval anymore. I'd built something on my own. I didn't need their validation. Still, I stayed long enough to hear them out. I asked questions, took notes, watched as Nathan's excuses crumbled under the weight of his own lies. Every document he showed me was another nail in the coffin he'd built for himself. And while part of me pitied him, another part, the one that had spent years being dismissed, felt something else entirely. Clarity. When I left that office, the air felt different. Heavy but cleansing. The past was collapsing behind me, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to let it fall. I went back to my firm and poured my energy into expanding it. New clients came pouring in, impressed by the precision and transparency of my work. My team grew from 3 people to 12, then 20. We rented a small building downtown, bright and modern, everything my father's company used to be but never truly was. And as months passed, I started hearing whispers again, this time about me. Oliver's firm is the one that gets results. He's the guy who saved half the local suppliers. He's not like his family. It was bittersweet. I hadn't set out to compete with them, but life had a way of circling back. Then one day, I got a message from an old contact, one of my father's remaining investors. He wanted to meet. The company was falling apart, he said, and he was looking for someone reliable to buy the assets before they went under completely. That night, as I sat at my desk reviewing the details, I realized how far I'd come. The boy who'd been dismissed, ignored, and underestimated was now being handed the keys to everything they'd once said he couldn't handle. But I didn't move right away. I didn't want to act out of spite, not yet. I wanted a plan. Because if I was going to fix things this time, I wasn't going to just clean up their mess. I was going to rebuild it on my own terms. It's strange how silence can feel louder than any argument. After I left that night, the night of my father's ultimatum and my brother's smug smirk, the house I grew up in became nothing more than a collection of empty memories. I didn't look back. I didn't answer calls. And for the first few weeks, I walked around with this hollow ache, a mixture of humiliation and grief. Losing your family isn't like breaking up with someone. It's a dismantling of your identity. Every word they ever said, every gesture that once felt like love, you start to doubt all of it. I stayed in a cheap apartment at first. Bare walls, secondhand furniture, and a mattress on the floor. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No expectations. No guilt tripping. No condescending lectures. I'd sit by the window at night and replay everything in my head. The way my father's tone had changed when he said, "You'll handle this one," as if I were a burden being passed around. The way my mother had looked away when I needed her to speak up. And my brother, grinning like he'd won something. The bitterness was hard to swallow, but something else began growing in me. Focus. Anger has a way of sharpening your vision. I realized that all those years of being the quiet one, the responsible one, had made me observant. I'd paid attention to things they hadn't. How the business worked. Who the real clients were. The financial gaps my brother's impulsive decisions had caused. I might have been dismissed, but I wasn't blind. For months, I buried myself in work. I got a job with a logistics company downtown. Ironic, considering my family's business was in the same field. But this time, I wasn't the one doing favors for anyone else. I started from scratch, and to my surprise, I was good at it. Really good. I understood efficiency, people, timing, all the things my father never gave me credit for. I worked quietly, kept my head down, and absorbed everything like a sponge. By my 3rd year there, I'd been promoted twice. I had a small team under me and the freedom to take on projects independently. I started saving again, properly, this time. I kept detailed notes, built relationships, and learned how to negotiate contracts better than most managers I'd ever met. Every skill I learned felt like a quiet form of rebellion. Each success was a silent "See, I told you so." But the real turning point came when I ran into an old acquaintance from my father's company, Marco. He'd been one of the mid-level managers who quit after my brother took over a few years back. We bumped into each other at a networking event, both of us surprised to see the other there. After a few minutes of small talk, he asked if I'd heard about the business lately. I hadn't. I'd deliberately avoided any news about them. He sighed. It's not doing well, Oliver. Your brother's not exactly leadership material. Word is, your dad's been trying to cover up the losses, but the suppliers are pulling out. Something inside me stirred. Not joy, not yet, but a flicker of curiosity. Marco continued. Honestly, if someone came in and offered a smart partnership or buyout, they might take it. Desperation makes people consider things they wouldn't normally. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about it. The company I'd been cast out of, struggling. My father had once told me I wasn't tough enough for real business, but apparently, their so-called real business was falling apart. I spent the next few weeks researching. I didn't reach out to anyone directly. Not yet. Instead, I started gathering information quietly. I still knew a few people who worked in related industries, so I asked questions here and there. Supply chain issues, contract failures, unfulfilled orders. The company was barely staying afloat. My brother had made a series of bad deals trying to expand, and my father was too stubborn to admit it had been a mistake. I could have laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I started planning. I met with a lawyer, a friend of one of my colleagues, and explained a hypothetical scenario about a struggling family business with unpaid debts and a crumbling reputation. He gave me advice on how acquisitions worked, what kind of leverage I'd need, and how to make it appear as though I was coming in as a savior rather than a rival. Every night, I filled pages of a notebook with names, connections, possible strategies. I wasn't rushing this. Revenge wasn't about speed. It was about precision. A few months later, I registered my own company, small at first, built around consulting and logistics optimization. I knew exactly where the flaws in my family's old system were. I built mine to be leaner, faster, more adaptable. I recruited people who'd left my father's company over the years, the ones who'd felt overlooked or mistreated. Marco was the first to join. Then came Linda, the best coordinator they'd ever had. One by one, they came aboard. We worked quietly, under the radar. No flashy announcements, no dramatic reveals, just results. Within a year, my company had tripled in size. I built partnerships with suppliers that my brother had driven away, and unlike him, I actually kept my word. We became reliable, efficient, everything my father's business used to be before pride and favoritism rotted it from the inside out. Then came the day I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. My father. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Oliver, he said, his voice low and surprisingly strained. I heard you started your own firm. I did, I said calmly. Good. Good for you. He paused, then sighed. Listen, things haven't been easy here. The industry's been tough lately. I leaned back in my chair, letting him continue. Your brother's been doing his best, he added, though it sounded forced. But the market's unpredictable. We've lost a few clients. I'm aware, I said. It's hard out there. But that's business. He hesitated again. Maybe we could talk sometime. See if there's a way to work together. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I wanted to laugh, but I kept my tone neutral. Sure. Let's talk. We set up a meeting a week later. I didn't tell him I'd already seen the company's latest financials. I'd managed to get copies through one of my contacts. The numbers were worse than I thought. Massive debts, pending lawsuits, unpaid suppliers. They were drowning. When I walked into the conference room that day, both my father and brother were there. My father looked older, more tired. My brother, on the other hand, tried to maintain that same cocky smirk he'd worn years ago, but I could see the tension behind his eyes. Oliver, my father said, forcing a smile. It's good to see you. I nodded. Likewise. We exchanged pleasantries before getting down to business. My father danced around the topic, but eventually, it became clear they needed help. A partner, an investor, something, and they wanted me. The irony was almost too much to bear. I listened carefully, pretending to consider it seriously. I asked questions, offered vague responses, and kept my real intentions hidden. When I left that meeting, I shook both their hands, smiling politely. But inside, I was already building the next phase of my plan. I wasn't just going to help. I was going to take back what they stole from me and make sure they understood exactly who they'd underestimated. It would take time, patience, strategy, but I'd learned that revenge, when done right, didn't need shouting or drama. It needed timing, and I was ready. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I couldn't help but think of the day my father had said those words. You'll handle this one. This time, I really would, but not in the way he expected. And when the moment came, I would make sure everyone in that boardroom, my father, my mother, my brother, finally understood what fixing things really meant. I smiled to myself, already picturing their faces. By the time I made my move, everything was in place. I'd spent months quietly building leverage, lining up allies, and preparing for the perfect timing. My own company, Northway Solutions, had grown beyond anything I could have imagined, and I had access to a network of suppliers, investors, and former employees of my father's company who trusted me implicitly. Meanwhile, the old family business was a fragile house of cards. Every bad deal Nathan had made, every unpaid invoice, every overextended contract was a weak point I knew how to exploit. It began with the shareholders. I reached out quietly, subtly reminding them of all the missed payments, the failed deals, and the declining revenue. They had been loyal to the company because of my father's reputation, but loyalty wanes when the money stops coming in. I didn't push aggressively. I simply provided the facts, documented and irrefutable. The shareholders started asking questions. Their tone was cautious at first, but soon it turned panicked. By the time Nathan realized what was happening, they were demanding immediate action, threatening to remove him from management if the losses continued. Next, I focused on the suppliers. I personally called several of the biggest ones, the ones Nathan had overpaid or ignored, and offered a deal that would pay them promptly, with full transparency, if they agreed to work with me as a partner or consultant. Every call, every meeting was calculated. I didn't need to threaten. I just reminded them of the trust Nathan had squandered and the reliability I could provide. Within a few weeks, key suppliers who had once been loyal to the family company were quietly signing agreements with Northway Solutions. Meanwhile, I kept a low profile with my father. I didn't confront him. I didn't lecture him. I simply let him watch. He still believed Nathan could turn things around, still thought he was protecting his older son. But I had learned over the years that he valued results over excuses, even if he didn't act immediately. By the time he started to realize the depth of Nathan's incompetence, it was too late. I was already controlling the narrative externally. Then came the internal restructuring. I reached out to several key employees, the ones Nathan had alienated or undervalued. I offered them positions in Northway Solutions with better pay, better benefits, and genuine respect. Slowly, they left. At first, a few here and there. Then entire departments realized they could no longer tolerate Nathan's erratic management and the toxic environment he created. The company's internal operations began to collapse in real time. Throughout all this, Nathan didn't understand what was happening. He kept blaming the market, bad luck, even our father. He didn't see me working behind the scenes, quietly orchestrating the shift in control. And he certainly didn't see the network of support I had cultivated, former employees, investors, suppliers, and clients, all waiting for the right moment to act. That moment came on a Friday morning. I arrived at the office early, dressed sharply and carrying a thick binder. My father and Nathan were in the conference room with the bank representatives, discussing what little liquidity remained. Nathan was agitated, sweating through his suit, mumbling about unexpected delays and temporary setbacks. My father was tense, nodding politely but clearly overwhelmed. I knocked once on the open door. "Oliver," Dad said, surprised to see me. "What are you?" I stepped inside, setting the binder on the table. "Morning, gentlemen. I believe it's time we review the current status of the company." Nathan shot me a glare. "You're not supposed to." "Sit down," I said, calmly, and for the first time, I saw him hesitate. He knew I was serious. I opened the binder and began presenting the data. All the numbers Nathan had hidden, all the contracts he had mismanaged, all the expenses he had disguised as legitimate costs. I traced each dollar, each supplier, each failed deal. I highlighted missed payments, investors' complaints, and projected insolvency if immediate action wasn't taken. Dad's face paled as he followed the data. Nathan's face turned red, then white, then a shade of panic I hadn't seen before. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off before he could mutter an excuse. "Everything is here. Every misstep, every failure, every deception. And I've already prepared a plan to stabilize the company. If you follow it, you'll survive. If you ignore it, you won't." I paused for effect, letting the weight of my words sink in. Then I revealed the final piece, my network. I handed Dad a list of suppliers, employees, and investors who were ready to work with Northway Solutions if the company couldn't recover under Nathan's leadership. I made it clear I had already secured their loyalty, and I had the resources to continue operations without the family company if necessary. Nathan's voice cracked as he protested. "You can't just, these people, this isn't legal." "Everything is legal," I said evenly. "I've followed every regulation, every contract. You, on the other hand, have repeatedly broken both company policy and fiduciary duty. The evidence is here, and the consequences are real." The bank representatives cleared their throats. "Mr. Oliver, if what you're presenting is accurate, we will need to take immediate action to protect our investments." Nathan looked around the room, helpless. He couldn't intimidate anyone, couldn't charm anyone, couldn't hide the collapse he had caused. His empire, built on arrogance and favoritism, was crumbling before him. My father leaned back, exhausted and finally seeing the truth. "Oliver, I held up a hand. "It's okay, Dad. I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to fix what you've built." And then, calmly, I presented my terms. Northway Solutions would take over the operational management of the company, absorbing its assets, stabilizing the debts, and rescuing the suppliers. Nathan would be removed from all leadership positions. My father would retain ownership, but would have to trust my decisions entirely. There was a long pause. Nathan's face was a mask of disbelief, fury, and desperation. My father's expression was a mixture of regret and reluctant relief. Finally, Dad nodded. "Do what you need to do, Oliver." That was all I needed. Over the next weeks, I executed the plan. Suppliers were paid, contracts were renegotiated, and employees who had been disgruntled were reinstated or rehired under fair terms. Northway Solutions took the lead on all client communications, ensuring the company's reputation remained intact. Investors were briefed on the restructuring, and the bank extended short-term financing based on my detailed projections and guarantees. Nathan was left out of everything. He was still in the office, still trying to maintain a presence, but no one listened to him anymore. He tried to argue, tried to make deals, even threatened legal action, but every move he made was countered by documented evidence of his mismanagement. Even Dad had to intervene on my side, not because he had chosen me over Nathan, but because the truth was undeniable. And then came the final act. I called a company-wide meeting, inviting every employee, supplier, and key investor who had been involved. Nathan walked in, smug at first, expecting to command the room as usual. But as I began to speak, outlining the recovery plan, acknowledging the employees' hard work, and presenting the new management structure, his arrogance faltered. The room's attention shifted entirely to me. I finished with a single line that reverberated through the room. "This company is bigger than any one person's ego, and from now on, it will be run by competence, not favoritism." Nathan's jaw dropped. He looked at my father, then at me, and finally at the employees who were nodding in agreement. For the first time in years, he realized he wasn't in control, and never had been. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. By the end of that week, the company was stabilized under my management. My father, finally seeing that I had the capability and vision he had refused to recognize for years, gave me his reluctant but genuine respect. Nathan was removed from all decision-making roles, his authority stripped quietly but decisively. The employees who had once been intimidated by him flourished under the new, fair leadership. Months later, the company was thriving again. Northway Solutions became a trusted partner, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that everything was done cleanly, legally, and permanently. My brother's reputation was damaged beyond repair in the industry, and his arrogance had isolated him from former allies. My father, once blind to favoritism, finally admitted, quietly, to me alone, that I had been the one who had kept the family's legacy alive. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. The work, the planning, the patience, and the quiet execution were revenge enough. I walked through the office one evening, alone, looking at the people who now trusted and respected me. I remembered every insult, every dismissal, every sneer from my brother, and the indifference from my parents. And I smiled, because I hadn't just fixed the company. I had finally fixed my own place in the world, on my terms. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the backup plan anymore. I was in control, completely. And that was a victory no one could take away. The look on Nathan's face that day, helpless, Furious, finally seeing the consequences of his arrogance, was the last confirmation I needed. I had done what they all thought was impossible. I had turned the tables. And I had won.